The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor, crystal fragments scattering like diamonds across the blood-red carpet. Park Ji-woon's hand froze midair, his entire body locked in place as if time itself had stopped. Around him, the exclusive Manhattan restaurant buzzed with the low murmur of New York's elite. But he heard none of it. His dark eyes were fixed on something impossible, something that made his heart, a heart he'd convinced himself had turned to stone 2 years ago, suddenly hammer against his ribs, like it was trying to break free. A child. A little girl, no more than 2 years old, had broken away from her mother's grasp and was now giggling as she weaved between tables, her tiny legs carrying her in an unsteady run directly toward him. Her skin was a beautiful deep brown, her hair twisted into adorable puffs, decorated with bright yellow beads that clicked softly as she moved. She wore a white dress with sunflowers embroidered along the hem, and her laughter was pure joy, untainted by the darkness that filled Ji-woon's world. But none of that was what made him freeze. None of that was what made the most feared man in Seoul's underground forget how to breathe. It was her wrist. As she reached up, tiny hands grabbing at his expensive suit pants for balance, her sleeve fell back. And there on her inner left wrist was a birthmark he'd seen only once before in his entire life, when he looked at his own reflection. A crimson phoenix, wings spread wide, detailed and distinctive. The mark that had been in the Park family bloodline for 7 generations. The mark that appeared on only one child per generation. At his mark. The little girl looked up at him with curious brown eyes flecked with gold, and smiled the kind of innocent smile that could crack even the hardest armor. "Hi," she said in a tiny voice, then giggled again, completely unaware that she'd just detonated a bomb in the middle of Ji-woon's carefully controlled existence. Before he could move, before he could think, before he could process what he was seeing, a woman's panicked voice cut through his shock. "Zuri, baby, no, come back here." And that voice. God, that voice. Ji-woon's head snapped up, and the world tilted on its axis. Thandiwe. She was running toward them, her long braids swinging, her brown eyes wide with the kind of maternal panic every mother knows when their child escapes their sight. She wore a flowing yellow dress that reminded him of Cape Town sunsets, of her art studio filled with light, of the way she used to dance in his arms on her balcony overlooking the ocean. She was just as beautiful as he remembered, maybe more so, though there was a tiredness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Their eyes met across the 10 feet that separated them, and Thandiwe stopped so abruptly she nearly stumbled. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. In that moment, Ji-woon saw everything: shock, terror, regret, and something else he couldn't quite name. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. "No, no, no." Ji-woon's right-hand man, Min-seo, was already standing, hand moving toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. The 3 Yakuza associates they were supposed to be meeting had gone silent, keying their predatory instincts, sensing the sudden shift in energy. But Ji-woon held up one hand, a slight gesture that froze everyone in place. His eyes never left Thandiwe's face. "Mama," Zuri called out happily, still clutching Ji-woon's pants. "Look, this man has my special mark too." The restaurant noise seemed to fade to nothing. Ji-woon looked down at the little girl, his daughter, his mind supplied with absolute certainty, and then back at Thandiwe. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously soft, the kind of soft that made grown men confess to crimes they didn't commit. "How old is she?" Thandiwe's hands were shaking. She moved forward slowly, like approaching a dangerous animal, and gently scooped Zuri into her arms. The little girl protested, reaching back toward Ji-woon. "But Mama, he has—" "I know, baby. I know." Thandiwe's voice cracked. She held Zuri tighter, protective, her body angled as if ready to run. But where could she run? Ji-woon was already standing, his tall frame blocking the most direct path to the exit, and he had no intention of letting her disappear again. "I asked you a question." Ji-woon took a step forward. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, not in anger, not yet, but to keep them from shaking. 2 years. 2 years of trying to forget her, of burying himself in work and blood and violence to drown out the memory of her smile, her laugh, the way she'd made him feel almost human. 2 years of wondering why she'd left without a word, without a trace, as if their 3 months together had meant nothing, and now this truth that was rewriting everything he thought he knew. If you're enjoying this story, Please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think is going to happen next. Your support means everything, and trust me, you won't want to miss where this story goes. 2 years and 3 months, Thandiwe finally answered, her voice barely above a whisper. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, though she held her head high. She turned 2 last month. Jiwoon's jaw clenched so hard, he thought his teeth might crack. The math was simple, brutal, undeniable. She's mine. It wasn't a question. They both knew it wasn't a question. But Thandiwe nodded anyway, a tiny jerky movement that seemed to take all her strength. We need to leave, she said suddenly, urgently. She was already backing away, Zuri confused in her arms. This was a mistake. We shouldn't have come here. I'm sorry. You're not going anywhere. The words came out harder than Jiwoon intended, and he saw Thandiwe flinch. Minseo had moved to block the other exit. The Yakuza were watching with undisguised interest now, and Jiwoon cursed internally. This was the worst possible place, the worst possible time for this reunion. But fate, it seemed, didn't care about his carefully laid plans. Jiwoon, please. Thandiwe's voice broke on his name, and something in his chest twisted painfully. Not here, not like this. He wanted to rage at her. He wanted to demand answers, to shake her, to ask how she could have kept this from him. His daughter. He had a daughter. A little girl with his bloodline mark, with his eyes. Now that he looked closer, he could see it, the shape of them, the way they tilted slightly at the corners. His daughter who didn't know him, who had lived 2 years without him, who had taken her first steps and said her first words, and learned to laugh while he'd been half a world away, drowning in grief and anger over the woman who'd abandoned him. Except, she hadn't just abandoned him. She'd been carrying his child. There's a private room in the back, Jiwoon said flatly. He turned to Minseo and switched to Korean. Clear it, now, and get rid of our guests. Tell them something came up. We'll reschedule. Minseo hesitated, his eyes flicking to Thandiwe with barely concealed suspicion, but he nodded and moved quickly. The Yakuza boss started to protest, but one look at Jiwoon's face made him reconsider. Smart man. Jiwoon turned back to Thandiwe and his voice dropped lower, for her ears only. You have 2 choices. You can walk to that private room with me now and we can talk like civilized people. Or I can have my men escort you there, and we both know how that looks. He paused, his eyes dropping to the little girl in her arms. To Zuri, his mind corrected. Her name is Zuri. And his expression softened, almost imperceptibly. I'm not going to hurt you, either of you. But you owe me answers, Thandiwe, and I will have them. For a long moment, she just stared at him, searching his face for something. What she found there must have convinced her because she finally nodded, defeated. Okay, we'll talk. The private room was elegant, all dark wood and soft lighting, with a table that could seat 12 but was currently empty. Jiwoon dismissed the staff and closed the door behind them, and suddenly aware that he was alone with the 2 people who'd just turned his entire world upside down. Thandiwe set Zuri down, and the little girl immediately began exploring, her earlier fear forgotten in the way only children can manage. Jiwoon leaned against the closed door, arms crossed, watching as his daughter picked up a silk napkin and giggled at the texture. He didn't know what to feel. Anger? Joy? Betrayal? Love for a child he'd just discovered existed? All of it crashed over him in waves, threatening to pull him under. Talk, he said finally. Thandiwe was standing near the table, her hands gripping the back of a chair so hard her knuckles had gone pale. She took a shaky breath. I found out I was pregnant 3 days after you left Cape Town. I didn't leave. I had to go back to Seoul for business. I was planning to return in 2 weeks. You knew that. His voice was harsh, accusations barely contained. I know what you told me. She met his eyes, and there was fire in hers now, anger matching his own. But I also know what I found out about you the day after you left, Jiwoon. Or should I say, Park Jiwoon, heir to the Park Syndicate. One of the most wanted men in 3 countries. His blood ran cold. How did you... Your picture was on the news. Her laugh was bitter, broken. There was a raid on one of your warehouses in Seoul. 6 people died. And there you were, Park Jiwoon, the devil of Seoul. Wanted for racketeering, arms trafficking, murder. They showed your photo, and I realized that the man I'd fallen in love with The man whose child I was carrying wasn't who I thought he was at all. Jiwoon's jaw worked. Now, he wanted to defend himself, to explain that the man he'd been with her was real, that none of it had been a lie. But the words stuck in his throat because, wasn't it a lie? Hadn't he deliberately hidden his true identity from her, knowing she'd never have looked at him twice if she'd known what he really was? So you ran, he said flatly. So I protected my child. Thandiwee's voice rose, startling Zuri, who looked up with worried eyes. Thandiwee immediately softened her tone, going to her daughter and stroking her hair. It's okay, baby. Mama's just talking. Keep playing. When Zuri returned to her exploration, Thandiwee turned back to Jiwoon, and her eyes were blazing with unshed tears. What was I supposed to do? Bring a baby into your world? Let her grow up surrounded by violence and death? Watch her learn that her father was a criminal, that people feared him, that he killed people. Each word hit like a physical blow, but Jiwoon kept his expression neutral. He'd learned long ago how to hide pain. You didn't give me a choice. You didn't even give me a chance. And what would you have done? Thandiwee challenged. If I'd come to you and said, I'm pregnant, but I can't be with you because of who you are, what would you have done? The answer came immediately, instinctively. I would have protected you, both of you. I would have made sure you were safe, taken care of. You would have kept us in a gilded cage. Thandiwee's voice was sad now, resigned. And eventually, your enemies would have found us. They always do, don't they? I did my research, Jiwoon. I learned about your world, about the kidnappings, the revenge killings, the way rival organizations target families. I learned about what happened to your mother. Jiwoon went very still. His mother's death was not something he spoke about. Ever. The fact that Thandiwee knew about it, had dug deep enough to find that information, told him exactly how thorough her research had been. And it also told him she'd been terrified. Terrified enough to disappear completely. To raise their child alone, rather than risk his world touching her. He couldn't even be angry about that. Not when he knew she was right. So, you've been running for 2 years, he said quietly. Hiding. Keeping my daughter from me. Keeping her alive, Thandiwee corrected. And safe and happy. Look at her, Jiwoon. He did. Zuri had found a small vase of flowers on a side table and was gently touching the petals, completely absorbed. She was beautiful, perfect, completely innocent. And she was his. Does she know about me? The question hurt to ask. Thandiwee shook her head. How could I tell her about a father she'd never meet? How could I explain that her daddy was alive, but we couldn't be with him because bad men might hurt us if they knew we existed? She wiped her eyes roughly. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought if we stayed far away, if we kept moving, if I was careful, she could have a normal life. And yet here you are, in New York, in a restaurant where I just happened to be. Jiwoon's eyes narrowed. That's not coincidence, Thandiwee. She looked away, guilt written across her features. My friend Amara lives here. I thought enough time had passed. That maybe it was safe to stop running. Yeah, to settle down somewhere. I didn't know you were in New York. I swear, I had no idea you'd be here, in this restaurant, today. Jiwoon believed her. The shock on her face when she'd seen him had been too real to fake. But belief didn't change the situation. Didn't change the fact that the moment they'd collided, his world and hers had merged in the most dangerous way possible. Because they hadn't been alone in that restaurant. His Yakuza contacts had seen. Minseo had seen. And if there was one thing Jiwoon knew with absolute certainty, it was that secrets in his world didn't stay secret for long. As if summoning his worst fears, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, read the message, and felt ice slide down his spine. What? Thandiwee asked, reading his expression. What is it? We need to leave. Now! Jiwoon was already moving towards Zuri, and Thandiwee stepped in front of him instinctively, protective. He stopped, holding up his hands. Thandiwee, listen to me very carefully. My enemies saw us together. They saw your daughter, and they saw the way I reacted. By now, word is spreading that Park Jiwoon has a weakness, a black woman and a child. They will come for you to hurt me. Do you understand? We need to get you somewhere safe immediately. The color drained from Thandiwee's face again. No, no, this can't be happening. It's already happening. Another buzz. Another message. Ji-woon cursed in Korean. Kang Dae-sung. He's a rival, and he's in the city. Min Seo says there are already men moving toward this location. If you're wondering what happens next, drop a like on this video and comment below with your predictions. Make sure you're subscribed because this story is about to get intense. Thandiwee scooped up Zuri, who immediately sensed her mother's fear and started to whimper. Mama, what's wrong? Nothing, baby. We're just going to take a little trip. But Thandiwee's voice was shaking and her eyes found Ji-woon's. In them, he saw accusation, fear, and something that looked like, I told you so. This is exactly why I left. Your world destroys everything it touches. The words cut deeper than any knife, but Ji-woon didn't have time to bleed. He opened the door to find Min Seo waiting, tension radiating from every line of his body. They spoke rapidly in Korean. Back exit is compromised. They're covering it. How many? At least 8, maybe more. Cars? 2 minutes out. But we'll have to go through the front. And it'll be exposed. Ji-woon's mind raced, calculating angles and odds. 8 men. 2 minutes. A woman and a child to protect. Not impossible, but risky. Too risky. He turned back to Thandiwee. Can you run? She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. I'm holding a 2-year-old. Then hold her tight and stay behind me. Min Seo will take rear guard. When we get to the car, you get in first with Zuri, and you get down on the floor. Don't look up no matter what you hear. Understand? Thandiwee was shaking her head, tears streaming now. This can't be happening. We can't. Ji-woon stepped forward and gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Thandiwee, I failed you once. I let you walk out of my life because I was too proud to chase after you. I lost 2 years with my daughter because of my world, my choices, my life. No, I will not lose her now. I will protect you both. But I need you to trust me. Just for the next 5 minutes. Can you do that? For a heartbeat, she just looked at him. Then, slowly, she nodded. Good. Let's move. The journey through the restaurant was surreal. Ji-woon walked in front, his hand inside his jacket resting on the grip of his gun. Behind him, Thandiwee clutched Zuri, who had gone quiet in that instinctive way children do when they sense real danger. Min Seo brought up the rear, his eyes constantly scanning. The restaurant patrons stared as they passed, sensing something wrong but not understanding what. They made it to the front entrance. Through the glass doors, Ji-woon could see his car pulling up, a black armored SUV, one of 3 he kept in New York for emergencies exactly like this. He also saw the 2 men across the street trying very hard to look like they weren't watching the restaurant entrance. Straight to the car, he murmured. Don't stop for anything. He pushed through the doors and everything happened at once. The 2 watchers across the street pulled weapons. Min Seo was already returning fire, the sharp crack of gunshots shattering the New York afternoon. Pedestrians screamed and scattered. Ji-woon grabbed Thandiwee and Zuri, his body shielding theirs as he ran for the SUV. More gunfire. The window next to them exploded. Thandiwee screamed, clutching Zuri so tight the little girl cried out. The SUV door flew open. Ji-woon literally threw them inside, diving in after them as Min Seo laid down covering fire. The driver didn't wait for instructions. The moment Min Seo tumbled into the front passenger seat, the SUV was moving, tires screaming against asphalt. More gunfire pinged off the armored exterior. Zuri was sobbing now, terrified beyond understanding. Thandiwee was crying too, curled around her daughter on the floor of the car, her entire body shaking. Ji-woon knelt beside them, his hand gentle on Thandiwee's back. It's okay, we're safe. The car's armored. They can't hurt you. But Thandiwee lifted her head, and the look she gave him was devastating. This is your safe? This is what you call protection? We were just shot at. My baby... Her voice broke completely, dissolving into sobs. Ji-woon wanted to comfort her, but he didn't have the right. Not when she was correct. This was his world, his life, his fault. Instead, he shrugged off his jacket and draped it over Zuri, who was still crying in fear. The little girl looked up at him with confused, terrified eyes, and Ji-woon felt something crack in his chest. Hi, Zuri, he said softly in English, trying to gentle his voice. My name is Ji-woon. I'm a friend of your mama's. You're safe now, okay? I promise. Zuri buried her face in Thandiwee's shoulder, and Ji-woon sat back, the rejection stinging more than any bullet could. They drove for 20 minutes, taking random turns and doubling back to ensure they weren't followed, before pulling into an underground garage beneath a building Ji-woon owned in Midtown. He hadn't been lying when he said the car was armored. It had taken the bullets without any penetrating the interior. But that didn't make what had just happened any less traumatic. As they took the private elevator up to the penthouse safe house, Zuri had finally cried herself to exhaustion and fallen asleep in Thandiwei's arms. Thandiwei herself looked like she was in shock, her eyes distant, her breathing too quick. The penthouse was secure, comfortable, and impersonal. Exactly what a safe house should be. Ji-woon directed Thandiwei to the master bedroom. There's a bathroom through there. Clean clothes in the closet. They might be too big, but there's something. Take your time. I'll have food sent up. Thandiwei didn't argue. She just carried Zuri into the bedroom and closed the door quietly behind her. Ji-woon stood in the living room, his hands clenched into fists, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his emotions. Rage at Kang Dae-sung for daring to threaten his family, and then grief for the 2 years he'd lost. Fear, genuine, bone-deep fear, that he might not be able to keep them safe. And underneath it all, a fierce, protective love for a little girl he'd known for less than an hour. His daughter, his Zuri. Minseo approached cautiously. What do you want to do? Contact everyone. I want Kong's location, his resources, his weaknesses. I want to know who he's working with and where his men are. Ji-woon's voice was cold, deadly calm. And then I want him to understand that touching my family means death. Not just for him. For everyone he's ever cared about. That's a war, boss. Then it's a war. Ji-woon turned to face his right-hand man. But make sure everyone knows the terms. Anyone who comes near that woman or that child forfeits their life. No negotiations. No mercy. Spread the word through every channel we have. Minseo nodded and moved away to make calls. Ji-woon poured himself a drink, scotch, expensive, smooth, and downed it in one burning swallow. Then he poured another and walked to the window, staring out at the Manhattan skyline as the sun began to set. Behind him, he heard the bedroom door open. Thandiwei emerged, having changed into a simple t-shirt and sweatpants from the closet. Her face was washed clean of tears, but her eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. She's asleep, Thandiwei said quietly. Finally. Ji-woon nodded. An awkward silence stretched between them. There was so much to say, and yet where did they even begin? I need to know, Ji-woon finally said, not turning from the window. Did you ever plan to tell me? If today hadn't happened, now if we hadn't run into each other by accident, would I have ever known I had a daughter? The silence that followed was answer enough. I don't know, Thandiwei admitted finally, her voice small. I told myself I was protecting her, that it was better this way. But sometimes, late at night when she'd ask about her father, she trailed off. I don't know. Maybe someday when she was older, when I thought it might be safe. Maybe. Maybe. Ji-woon laughed, but there was no humor in it. My daughter's first word, her first step, her first birthday. All maybes that I'll never have. All moments stolen from me because you decided I didn't deserve to know. That's not fair. Fair? Ji-woon spun to face her, and the raw pain in his expression made her step back. You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that I spent 2 years thinking you didn't care? That our time together meant nothing? Is it fair that I have a daughter who just met me for the first time while we were being shot at? Tell me, Thandiwei, what part of any of this is fair? You're a criminal, Thandiwei shot back, her own anger rising. You kill people, Ji-woon. You traffic weapons and drugs and God knows what else. Today proved I was right to keep her away from you. We were in your life for less than an hour, and we were already running for our lives. Because you were seen with me in public. If you'd come to me privately, if you'd let me prepare, let me set up proper security. There is no proper security from your world. Thandiwei was crying again, frustration and fear pouring out. Don't you understand? Your enemies will always come. There will always be someone who wants to hurt you by hurting the people you love. That's why I left. That's why I had to leave. Not because I didn't love you. She stopped abruptly, as if realizing what she'd admitted. Ji-woon went very still. You loved me? Don't! Thandiwei wiped her eyes roughly. That was before. Before I knew what you were. I'm the same man, Thandiwe. The man who held you while you painted. The man who learned to cook your favorite South African dishes. The man who sat with you for hours while you told me about your dreams of opening an art gallery. That man was real. He is real. That man doesn't exist in the real world. Only in stolen moments in Cape Town, hidden from reality. She shook her head. The real you is the man who has enemies. The real you is the man people fear. No, the real you is dangerous. Yes, Jiwoon agreed quietly. I am dangerous. I am feared. I have enemies and I've done terrible things. But I would burn down the entire world to keep you and Zuri safe. Doesn't that count for something? Thandue looked at him for a long moment. That's what terrifies me most. That you mean it. Before Jiwoon could respond, Minseo appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. We have a problem. Jiwoon's entire demeanor shifted, becoming the cold Mafia boss once more. What? Kang's made his move. He's put out word on the street. A bounty. On both of them. Minseo glanced apologetically at Thandue. $2 million, $500,000 just for information on their location. The glass in Jiwoon's hand shattered. He didn't even realize he'd been squeezing it until blood began dripping from his palm, mixing with the expensive scotch on the hardwood floor. Thandue gasped, but he ignored the pain, ignored everything except the burning rage building in his chest. How long do we have? Every two-bit criminal and bounty hunter in the city knows by now. Maybe an hour before someone figures out you own this building. 2 if we're lucky. Jiwoon's mind raced. They couldn't stay here. Couldn't run. Thandue and Zuri would slow them down. And Kang would have people watching every airport, every train station. They were trapped in New York with a target on their backs, and nowhere was safe. Unless. Call Lee Chang-min, Jiwoon ordered. Tell him I'm cashing in my favor. All of it. Minseo's eyes widened. No, Lee Chang-min ran the largest Korean syndicate on the East Coast, and he owed Jiwoon his life from an incident in Seoul 3 years ago. It was the kind of debt that could never be fully repaid, the kind of favor that was worth an entire war. You sure that's a big ask? Do it. I need his territory as a safe zone, his men as protection, and his word that anyone who touches my family answers to him personally. Jiwoon turned to Thandue and his voice gentled slightly. Pack whatever you need for Zuri. We're moving in 10 minutes. Where are we going? Koreatown. Lee's territory. It's the only place in the city where Kang won't dare make a move. He paused. Not immediately, anyway. It'll buy us time to plan. And then what? Thandue's voice was hollow. We just keep running? Keep hiding? This is my daughter's life now. No. Jiwoon's voice was steel. Then I end this. Permanently. Thandue stared at him, and he could see the war in her eyes. Fear, anger, resignation, and beneath it all, a spark of the love she'd claimed was from before. You're going to kill him. Kang Dae-sung? Yes. And his men. Anyone who threatens my family? Yes. That's who you are. A killer. She said it flatly, like stating a fact. That's who I need to be to protect you. Jiwoon met her gaze steadily. I can't change what I am, Thandue. I can't undo the things I've done or erase the blood on my hands. But I can make sure that no one hurts you or our daughter ever again. Even if you hate me for it. Even if Zuri grows up thinking I'm a monster. At least she'll grow up. At least she'll be alive. Thandue closed her eyes, on fresh tears sliding down her cheeks. When she opened them again, there was a terrible sadness there. I don't hate you, Jiwoon. That's the problem. Even knowing what you are, what you do, I look at you and I still see the man I fell in love with in Cape Town. And that terrifies me more than anything. Before Jiwoon could respond, before he could process the admission or what it meant, Zuri's voice called out from the bedroom. Mama! Thandue turned immediately, her entire focus shifting to her daughter. I'm here, baby. Mama's right here. Jiwoon watched her go, his bleeding hand forgotten, his mind reeling. She still loved him. Despite everything, despite his world and his sins, and the danger he represented, some part of her still loved him. And somehow, that made everything infinitely more complicated. No, and infinitely more worth fighting for. The little girl with the phoenix birthmark had appeared in his life like a comet, bright and unexpected and world-changing. And whether Thandue liked it or not, whether fate approved or not, Ji-woon had no intention of letting either of them go ever again, even if he had to tear apart his entire world to keep them safe. Especially then. The war had just begun. But for his daughter, for his Zuri, Park Ji-woon would win, no matter the cost. The end.